Hello, and welcome to a Bon Mott's production of
MOTSterpiece Theatre,
where we review critically acclaimed cinema spanning the breadth of human filmmaking.
MOTSterpiece Theatre.
Spoilers, mature content, inappropriate language. Join us.
MOTSterpiece Theatre. MOTSterpiece Theatre.
Hi, and welcome back to another episode of MOTSterpiece Theatre. Today we are doing number 45 on the AFI 100 list, Shane. So prepare for an episode where we're going to reference Shane and Stumps quite a bit.
We're going to say that stuff a lot, sure.
I'm Jonathan Ian Manzer, or Shane, here with Rich Perry.
Sorry, I'm stumped for the intro.
Scott Thurlow.
Shane Thurlow, if you please.
And Stephen Ramosi.
Yes, also Shane. Everyone is Shane.
I'm Shanicus. So, Scott, would you like to start off with the funny log line?
Sure. So we sort of came up with a bunch of them, but because this is a Western and another film that's on the AFI list, we came up with Butch Shanity and the Stump Dance Kid. And we'll sort of explain why that is funny and makes sense as we go on. But right. I just want to point out real quickly, the reason we chose this film is because we recently did Logan, in which that film they are references, and they're in fact watching Shane real quickly in the scene. So we sort of kind of tried to tie it in there, but
or in a way take their B plot from the A plot of this film.
Yeah.
But
That's very true.
Sure.
I will go into the actual synopsis, which is a beef baron in late 1800s Wyoming is attempting to chase out homesteaders, and in comes Shane, the gunslinger, to stop him. And most of this movie is just down home living on the frontier. So I think that's basically...
I mean, that's pretty much what happens.
Yeah, that's not a bad synopsis there.
And then Shane dies at the end.
Well, we'll talk about that.
Yeah. Well, speaking of talking about that, Steve-O, would you like to go into the introduction?
I would like to talk about the very opposite of the end of this movie. Yes. So we start off with Shane showing up. He is introduced to the family. It's a father, Joe, his son, Joey, and his wife, Marion or
Miriam or Marion.
Sure.
Something,
matter.
One of those.
Basically, they stand down. Like, one of the first scenes of this movie is a bunch of rustlers come up, the beef barons of your initial
Beer Baron Bruce
thing.
show up to hassle Joe and his family.
And they kind of get stood down by Joe and Shane. And then Joe and Shane cut down a stump together that Joe has literally been trying to cut out of the ground for 2 years.
So he says.
Other important things of the introduction are Shane goes into town to buy new clothes and gets whiskey thrown on him by some douchebag.
One of the Richter ruffians.
And then he goes back later and throws whiskey on that guy and punches him in the face.
2 shots of whiskey.
And that, I believe, is where the introduction ends.
Yeah, it's where Shane gets invested.
We're certainly going to go more in depth into this, but those are my favorite points from the introduction. Perhaps there are other points that are important, I think. But
Good.
Like, Shane is an outsider. He's coming into this family and decides to stay. He kind of is looking for something meaning, and they're looking for someone to protect them and help on the farm. And you've seen this in westerns before. And like
he's a lone drifter.
Yeah,
That show.
a lot of it is bonding.
An important thing. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Normally I would not, but I'm feeling a little frisky tonight, and
you're feeling a little Shane.
A little Shaney.
Shane got under my skin over here, but he is not there to protect them. I think that's an important point. He's there really just to help out on the farm, and I think the fact that Joe was not interested in having him be like a bodyguard or something like that was a big part of the reason that he stayed, if I'm correct. Which is kind of what I got out of the introduction.
I got the introduction that Shane couldn't help but stay with small child who does nothing but yells out Shane.
But yells his own name.
He's like if Pikachu or if Pokemon only said their owners' names, that was the little kid.
Or like he
from
got
this.
lost in his own head, Malkovich style.
It's kind of an amazing description. But no, in more seriousness, what I got is like, Shane is a former gunsman, like a gunslinger, and as part of his past, and he sort of like wants to reform or get away from that life. So he tries to show up, like be a simple like ranch hand essentially on Joe's little operation, farm.
He's got the itchiest trigger finger I've ever seen.
Sure, I mean,
in film.
he's got instincts, of course, but what I got is trying to reform, but he's dragged back into this conflict because he has the
trying
skills.
to get out.
I also got the sense that he had a past that might have come from eventually.
Sure.
And perhaps people like who would kill him if they caught up to him, because that makes sense for why he's jumping about every crash and going for his gun.
Yeah.
Not only to show off his skills, which they actually do a good job of demonstrating that Shane is. I almost forgot his name.
He's competent. How could you?
What the fuck is his name?
Don't worry, I'll remind
Shane
you.
is a competent gunslinger,
Yeah.
and they kind of validate it without him shooting a gun. Which
Sure, I mean,
like
you're right.
that.
That's a fair point. That was well integrated in there.
It's like I do like the fact that whenever he either got a chance to show off his quick draw through jumping at whatever sounds,
We're shooting a rock.
yeah, shooting a rock, which we'll get to.
Hold on, that's an important part of the body.
Is it?
But like he always, it wasn't, because you see a lot of times when characters do that in movies, they have like an immense sense of regret.
Mm.
And like, oh, I wish I hadn't have done that. But he's like very, I guess, accepting of Joey's questions about his past.
Sure, yeah.
He doesn't try to run from it.
Yeah, he doesn't try to
That's
run from it. He
true.
just
He doesn't
accepts
try to
it as a
hide it,
part
yeah.
of himself.
And he doesn't try to stop Big Joe from
Going down the same path, I guess.
quote being a man or whatever. Like,
Sure.
protecting, or not even protecting, but like standing up for what he thinks is right, even though it'll probably get him killed at some point, until the end where I'm getting ahead of myself.
Right. But in the intro, that is established, and God.
So there's one last point I want to make about the introduction, which is the bar fight is almost at the point of satire, where Big Joe and Shane are like, it's kind of dealt realistically, but kind of ultra violent-ish for a 1950s early film.
Right. I agree with that, but it's because of the time gap of like where we've come in depiction of just fights and so forth in film and medium in general. Like, yes, we were somewhat chuckling on it
Especially the movie that used this movie.
Yeah. So we were somewhat chuckling about it, but I mean, at the time, surely it was supposed to be like, an intense, fight scene that's meant to be taken seriously.
My thing is, I try to take a look at these through a time and place where they were made.
Sure, that's what
And
I'm
if
saying.
this scene were made today, it would have been like spectacularly over the top.
Somebody would have lost, at least 3 people would have lost limbs.
He would have taken that candy out of little Joey's mouth and shoved it through someone's eye.
Oh, whoa. Can I please have credit for that? Because I said that should happen.
Yes. I might get what you're saying, but go on.
But I beat you to the draw.
Damn it.
But the thing is, like, this was like, yeah, it kind of feels dated, but it's still kind of an impressive fight scene. And I
thought it was well
enjoyed
done.
it.
I'm just saying, like, the reason we were chuckling at points is because of that fact. But like, on the surface, it was perfectly fine, and I believe that was the cutoff. That's basically where Shane himself gets invested, and it gets pulled into the
I do have to
conflict.
say, I always loved 1950s haymakers.
Yeah.
Sure, and they've got one for you. So.
Yeah, with the character throwing himself off balance along with his opponent.
Yeah.
I would agree that it was actually a pretty impressive fight scene, or I think that it would have been very impressive if I
That's
had
what
seen
I'm
this in
saying.
theaters, or even shortly after it came out on TV or whatever.
Mm.
But I think it still, to some degree, holds up if you keep that in mind. Like, I think it's a good and like fun fight scene to watch.
Yeah, and I tried, again, time and the place thing. I tried to keep that back in mind, but
And
otherwise.
I'll leave most of this for style, but I like, Ian, you brought up a point about Joey and his watching of this that kind of reminds me of myself to some degree in my description of it. So I'll talk about
You
that a
remind me
little
of
bit
Joey
later.
too.
But
We'll move on.
what's everybody giving the intro in?
It's a hell of an insult.
Well, I'm going to give it a 1 because it's slow at times, but at time and place, and I think that it was more often like quality film and still had me invested for a large majority of it. Yeah, there are funny parts. Yeah, it's probably better because we were all enjoying it and laughing at it together.
We did MST3K it a little bit.
Sure.
but-
Here and there.
I think there are parts in there that still make it a quality film to watch. So I'm going to give it the benefit of the doubt here and give it a 1 for the introduction.
I'm definitely giving it a 1 because the establishing character moments for all the characters were very well done. And like I got everybody's personality, what their goals were, and pretty much what their roles were for the entire, what they were going to be for the rest of the movie.
Yeah, I agree with both of that. You said, Ian, that I thought it felt slow. The next question to the body, but I think it was a well done intro, and as Rich said, they established at the the setting, the characters, and who they were, and what they were doing, and what they were trying to accomplish. So I thought it was a perfectly solid one.
I agree. I don't have much more to say. I'm just going to leave it at that. I'm going to give it a 1.
So I'm going to move on to the body now, and we've already kind of preempted this, but this is like the body actually handles the majority of the film, which I'm guessing is like an hour and change.
I would say it's an easy 45 minutes, probably.
This movie is an hour and
2 hours.
basically just under 2 hours, and it feels longer than that. And maybe it's part of the time and the place, but this doesn't escape it. That the majority of the body deals with the slow fight that's brewing between the beef barons and the homesteaders, and one of them, like basically a rival gunslinger, comes in to join.
Hired a mercenary, essentially.
The beef baron Wilson, who's very like they had the music behind him, the black hat. He's a traditional Western villain, and he ends up killing one of the homesteaders, and some of the homesteaders decide to leave, and it kind of really the rest of it just that slow build up, and the cutting between scenes showing their lives, them debating whether they should stay or they should go, and then it eventually ends up with the guy getting killed, Stonewall, who's named after Stonewall Jackson,
or nickname, whatever.
Nickname, and they have his funeral, and a bunch of the homesteaders are about to leave, and it really builds up to the inevitable fight that's going to break out.
Sure, I mean, yes, that's what it builds up to, but like I said, again, as I use this term, most accurate one I could think of is it's meandering. So, for example, there's all that you just said, but also there's scenes of like Shane just kicking around the ranch with them, and like trying to teach little Joey how to shoot or whatever. So, like, yes, it's all there. It's their lives and so forth. But some of it, like, yes, like you said, the biggest gripe I have is that it feels longer than it actually is. And when that happens to a movie, like, it didn't lose me completely, but it threatened to at certain points. And like we even pointed out, a number of us during it, we were like, oh, this scene could be shorter or could be cut completely. So
I find it possibly a good, I'm not sure if it's a good or a bad thing that I now can still think of like every inch of their house. I mean, granted, it's a small house, but like, I'm like, oh yeah, that door with the 2 parts to it and the window at the side.
Sure, with the horse in it.
There's a second window that's like right next to the door. Like I can see things out that window and out that window. Like they give a really good sense of
place
in
space,
in that in their little house. But also,
we definitely
I'm like,
every inch
why do we need to have several scenes that are shot through this window? Or like, why do they need to have several scenes that where they open up the top part of that door instead of opening up the whole door?
So
like, you're right. Like there's a large portion of the body that feels like it treads water, and like they just have scenes in there that don't really do much.
I understand what they were trying to do with building up, trying to get you to care about these homesteaders and showing their lives.
Sure.
But it actually had the opposite effect. Maybe it's the attention span of our generation, but I stopped caring about them because I'm like, oh, they're living boring lives aside from this one. Like, there's one scene where you're seeing them at like an Independence Day celebration, and it's
a hoedown, but there's no reason for it.
Aside from, oh, you should care more about these characters. I was already invested.
I remember we were all waiting for something big to happen, like maybe an attack to set the rest of or at least start the
like raise the stakes or something.
Yeah.
Like Marion, maybe Marion was going to cheat on Joe with Shane.
You know what it was? It was just it was pretty much just the lead up to Stonewall making a drunken mistake.
Yeah, and exactly.
Pretty much.
It took like a winding path to get there, and I agree. Like what you just said, because of the nature of the film, and like yes, Shane is wearing a white hat, and when Wilson shows up, he's wearing a black hat, of course, and a black vest. Like I was already like. The conflict has already been set up. I'm on the homesteaders' side. You don't need to show me like their little like random moments of their lives. Like I'm already invested as the audience in their story. So like that meant that I didn't need to see like many of those scenes. So I'm probably going to give the body a 0 because of that. At the end of the day,
I have to agree.
I probably will too. Although I will tend to give this type of thing a little bit more leeway, I think, than you, Scott, and perhaps even you, Ian, will, just because I know that movies used to be
Yeah, and like I get it,
more
the time and the place,
epic,
etc.
like in scope, and there were parts that would show like this is normal, everyday, boring stuff, and there were scenes that probably weren't necessary because
I
they
get
were
it, but is it good narrative? I guess
working out what
sorry,
was.
go
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with you guys. I think I'm probably going to give it a 0 at the end of the day, just because it was fine, but it wasn't like there was nothing earth-shattering in the body. I think the intro and the conclusion actually were much better. But
During the body, there were no less than 4 scenes with the Beef Baron talking about how much he hates John Starrett,
Yeah.
Joe Starrett.
Like I got that. Thank you. Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
he'll go over and say like here are my motivations. I'm not a bad guy, and he'll say that and then hire the killer to go kill someone, and it's.
that's going to be a character thing.
Yes, but there's scenes that, as Rich is pointing out, that felt unnecessary.
Yeah, that's going to be a character thing, but I think they did that well in this movie, where they didn't just have I mean, there were points where I was like, oh yes, these guys are, as you mentioned, Scott, like card-carrying villains, but like they did give the main Riker guy,
Old man Riker,
a decent character arc, or if not an arc, at least motivation.
Traits. Yes, sure. They fleshed him out, but still.
Actually, I'm having a hard time remembering what the point was of him driving everybody off the land.
Because they were right in the middle of his where he was driving his cattle.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and he thought he deserved it. Like he had earned the land because he had fought for it. Blah blah blah. He had one of those. He had a speech that pointed that out.
Yeah.
But regardless, like it doesn't make up for it. Like it just didn't get there. So I got to give the body a 0.
Rich and
I agree.
Yeah, 0.
Okay, and now we're on to the conclusion with Rich.
All right, so after things heat up, we have the fisherman family get their cabin burned down. So Joe Starr Sr. decides to take it upon himself to go take on the entirety of the Riker gang in retaliation for what they've been doing to him and his friends. Shane knocks him out cold after a drawn-out fight that scares all of the farm animals and the rest of the family.
A they-live-ish fight, as I described it. But.
It was definitely a they-live-ish fight. Then finally knocks him out with his revolver. Sends his horse running, tells Marion to hide his gun, and then heads off to town, followed closely behind by little Joey.
Like super closely.
Yeah. It's just like every time the camera cuts back to him, he's like maybe 30 feet away from a football field away from his horse.
Unrealistically close, but whatever.
He's running almost as fast as a horse.
Film, I'll believe that. Go on.
This entire time the film's been showing them getting there by wagon or horse, and this kid makes it on foot.
The kid doesn't miss a moment of dialogue inside the bar.
True.
He's lightly covered in sweat. Yeah. Anyway, he gets there just in time to see Shane face off against not the entire gang, but just Wilson and the main
Old man Richter.
Well, have we explained who Wilson is really?
Yeah, he's the gunslinger.
we mentioned
he's
it.
The hired
he's
gun.
the
He's
hired.
He's a hired Yankee from up north.
He's if you know the 5-man band type thing, is the Dragon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Shane comes in, and this is the first time that he's worn his guns since the intro of the movie. Walks in, says a few words, calls out Wilson to a draw, kills him and Old Man Riker. Joey warns him of one of the henchmen sitting up in the rafters, kills him, sustains a gunshot, and gives a monologue to Joey right before he rides off into the moonset.
The moonset graveyard.
The
Moonlit graveyard.
Gravestone-ridden moonset.
Sure.
Yes. Just rides off while Joey continues to call his name. And
credits.
Some say
credits.
Joey's still calling his name to this day.
If you listen closely enough, you can hear Shane called over the hills.
The wind cries Shane, apparently.
So I actually wish that I knew more about the history of Westerns to see how revolutionary this kind of ending was.
Yeah.
Because when I watched it, it reminded me of Unforgiven, which I think I brought up when we were watching it. And many other Westerns that came after Shane. But it feels to me like having your main character die after not necessarily a gray morality type thing, but it seemed a more mature film for the 1950s Western. This seems more like a plot line that would have come out in the 60s or 70s type Westerns. And again, I don't know Westerns that well, but I'm interested to see where this stands on being influential.
I think what made it even more ballsy was to have him do a PSA on gun violence and how like being
That's true.
and how like even though he was the hero for the movie by killing these guys, he still killed these guys, and that makes him a bad person.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, it did
It's a
address that.
brand.
Yeah.
And that was actually the actual scene they were watching in Logan, like that little part.
Yeah.
And you're right, like that made me think of something. Ian, like I didn't really think about it, I guess, at the time, that perhaps when this movie was released in 1953, that was something that hadn't really been seen in the westerns at that time. And then maybe like the Unforgiven, like the No Name trilogy, like perhaps took cues from it. Perhaps it was more bold than we give it credit for because we have seen that, but it had to have come from somewhere, right? Like, tropes come from somewhere, like, the codifiers of them. So,
almost certainly this is a pretty dark ending for a movie in the 50s, like, and especially a Western. I'm not a big Western historian or anything, but I did watch a decent amount of them back when I was a kid because my grandfather used to watch Westerns all the time. And like a lot of the endings would be your standard fare, like, hero rides off into the sunset and,
right. This is like the opposite of that.
Victorious and like, he, is moving on to his next adventure or whatever. This is a much darker take on that.
Well, I have a suspicion that that's why we didn't actually see him die.
Mhm.
It might have been against the
code at the time.
code,
yeah.
like that
Sure.
your hero dies in these films. And then, because I've heard of similar things existing, and the fact that you don't see him bloody except that one line mentioning it.
No, he has a spot on his
It's like
shoulder.
a red spot. Yeah, you got red on you, essentially.
And they have to do the implication that he's riding into a graveyard to really, like, you have to put one together
Sure.
to find it out.
Sure.
And I think the funny thing is probably a lot of audiences in the 50s. While, I'm sure there were many sharp people that were watching movies back then. I would say movie audiences, for the most part, were less savvy than they are now.
I'll certainly agree to
A lot
that.
of people would probably not have picked up on that, but it is a pretty obvious thing. Him going through a graveyard into the, trudging towards the moon at
I
the
don't know,
end
man.
of
I
the
don't
movie.
trust off-screen deaths. He's coming
Well,
back
yeah,
for the sequel.
you've grown up in the in the
We've seen many
superhero era, so
Yeah.
yeah.
But
you
sure, I
can't
mean, I agree with all that, and like you said, all I can say is that, yeah, it's sort of like the inverse of riding off into the sunset victorious onto your next adventure, riding off to a moonlit graveyard after being shot. Even though you've won the quote, that little gunfight, that it's heavily implied, of course, like you said, to us.
Mhm.
But even so, like, surely some audiences must have put it together, and as I think more about it, that must have been a bolder move. So, and I think it was perfect narrative closure. It made sense to Shane's character. That's what his end needed to be. He's almost like John Marston, if you will, from Red Dead, even though I know you don't like that game as much. But regardless, it was a good full circle kind of a thing, and he gives a speech like outlaying, like, oh yes, this is the brand, as you said, Steve-O, and this is how I live. This is how ostensibly I'm going to die. So I think it was a stronger, of course, ending versus the body for me. So
It's a widely known ending for a reason. And I think I hadn't seen it before, and watching it now, I can see why it is, and I was impressed by it, even going in with expectations for what the ending was going to be. So I'm definitely giving it a strong one.
I pretty much
Yep,
agree, and I'll
I
give it a
agree.
one as well.
one here as well.
All right, Scott, on to you with themes.
Alrighty, so I might just parlay and open up to you gentlemen, but for the themes I took of it, like kind of like we just said, like you live by the sword, die by the sword, sort of. And yes, again, the nature of Westerns, and especially a character, like, I don't want to say caricature, but a template, like an archetype like this, again, that sort of like is going to be that arc for that character. So if they had done something different, I probably would have thought it was weaker, or like just didn't make sense, wasn't narrative closure, if you will. So I think they addressed that, and I think Steve-O might have something to say on top of this. But it's sort of like that, and it's sort of like, the American, like, I'm putting this in quotes, of, building your own stake, building your own house, making your own claim and trying to survive while being possibly muscled out by corporations. You could call the beef barons like basically a corporation, or in some sense, like, and perhaps I'm like, again, modernly viewing it through that lens.
Well,
But nevertheless, it's possibly something like that. Why don't you go on?
Go on.
I have something to say about that,
Okay.
actually. The other thing that you said I might bring up, I mean, that we may get to that, but that's
All right.
not a big part of my
Why don't you address this
argument.
first then?
The thing about the beef barons muscling, quote unquote, muscling people out is that they were there first, and I think that really they feel like they are the ones being muscled out, which I think is it's interesting that you put it that way. or not necessarily muscled out, but they feel like they're being pushed out, and that's why they feel like they have to stand up and
Push back.
push
Yeah, okay.
push the people that are coming into their area of Wyoming or whatever the hell it was out. Now, obviously, I don't stand with the beer barons. With the beef barons.
I do stand with the beer barons.
I stand with the beer barons, not the beef
Right.
barons.
Anyway.
I think that, they were obviously pretty villainous in this movie, but there is a point that the main guy has in saying, we came in, we cleared out all this land, and then you quote unquote squatters all just came here, built houses on it, and kind of cut off our direct route that they had with their herd that they were running through there. Now, whether or not you want to side with them, that's a different story, but
You're saying
they
that's
have a
part of the
point.
theme?
I'm
gonna guess.
I don't know if that necessarily counts as a theme, but I think that as you said earlier, Scott, the live by the gun or live by the sword, die by the sword mentality is definitely something that's kind of well done in this.
I think that's like the biggest aspect that they address, though, is all
Yeah.
I'm saying.
I would say that pride kills.
All right.
Because pretty much most of this trouble started from everybody trying to keep hold on to that sense of pride.
Yeah.
Try to quote unquote be a man.
Yeah.
And stand up for
That's true. That's a good
their
commentary,
beliefs.
too.
And they always ended up head to head. And when somebody should have backed down, they escalated.
Just escalated into violence,
Yeah.
sure.
So I'm going to skip ahead to protagonist for a moment because I need to address that before I go into the theme for this. I think the protagonist is little Joey and him calling Shane the entire time. Shane is a representative of his the heroic archetype, as you mentioned, and exactly what he wants out of a gunslinger, like this good-looking, fast-drawing, in a sense, he woos the mother. Or the mother.
He kind
falls
of
in love
does and
with him.
doesn't, but
Yeah, it's a will they, won't they?
His father definitely stepped out of the way for Shane to get it in.
And it's a realistic portrayal of the end for this character that might not have been shown before, or at least wasn't as effective, with having a little kid seeing his hero not gunned down. That's the wrong thing, but the hero does ride off into the sunset at the end. But this is. Being a gunslinger is not glamorous. It leads you dying in a bar or dying on a horseback out in the middle of the plains. And I think that's what they're really going for here, because it requires a little kid being the protagonist and Shane being that kind of
his hero
heroic
figure
image of it.
Yeah, I mean, I like all that, so I think I'm gravitate towards that more than I thought. Right after having watched a film, so. For that interpretation, I think they address all that. And if that is true, or if we at least agree that little Joey is you're supposed to be viewing it from his perspective, and Shane is that, serves that point, I think I'll probably give it a 1 on that front. And regardless of whether else is contained in it that you guys may bring up secondarily.
Yeah, I'm going to give themes a 1 based on everything that we've spoken about already. I think themes is one of the main strong points of this movie.
Yeah, I would agree.
To be honest.
Yep, and Stephen, keep talking with the antagonist.
Oh, I'll keep talking. All right. The antagonist.
Corporations.
I
like I
guess.
said.
I don't even remember the guy's name. What's his name?
Riker.
I kept thinking of him as Richter. So
It's the Riker group or family,
Yeah,
and
it's
then
the Riker.
Wilson
I don't even.
comes in.
Rufus Riker.
Rufus.
Oh, there you go.
All right.
Rufus, awesome.
Rufus, main antagonist. Not all that memorable as you. I mean, he was fine. He had crazy hair.
I think
Crazy.
he was way more memorable than Wilson.
I think Wilson was more memorable than him.
Well, I'm going to ask you a question, Steve-O, that you just real quickly, that you often ask others when we do this.
Sure.
Do you think that the characters were felt antagonized by Rufus Riker and his gang?
Yeah. I mean, yes, I do. I do think they did, but I don't know how. I mean, yes, I think that he was one of the main driving factors in this, or the idea of their, I guess, family or whatever the hell they were.
His family company, like I said.
They are the only. I feel like Joe and Marion. They're the only reason that this isn't an idyllic paradise, basically, right? Does that make him an effective antagonist? I mean, I guess so. I'll let you guys say what you're going to say.
So I want to make 2 points quickly. about this that I really enjoy for having a 50s Western villain. One, you actually watch his deterioration throughout the entire movie.
That's a good point.
And that he becomes, I wouldn't say desperate, but he starts to embrace his villainous role as it goes on.
Or he figures there's no other option but to escalate his methods against them.
To the point where he starts isolating his henchmen from the beginning of the movie, and as he takes on shadier and shadier characters. I thought Wilson was effective as a
I really like Wilson.
And I include him on the antagonist.
I was going to say I might roll him into antagonist, and if that's the case, I'm definitely going to give him one.
And I would argue that he, the obvious parallel between him and Shane, like the two sides of the same coin.
The white hat, the black hat.
Yeah, and then they both live by the sword, die by the sword.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I thought it was well done, especially it had a lot of depth. More so than I would expect from an early 50s film.
Sure.
Yeah, I misspoke before. I didn't mean to say that Riker was a more memorable villain than Wilson. Just that he was a more well-rounded villain.
Yeah,
than Wilson.
he's more fleshed out. Wilson, like you said, just kind of the dragon.
Like Wilson literally just shows up
to murder people.
Yeah,
yep. That's true.
But Rich, I make a counterpoint that I think Joe is the father, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Joe's a more well-rounded character than Shane is. And and they have sort of their parallels.
He is
because Joe is set up as the leader of the resistance, if you will. So like, since he saw Joe had his own like one-dimensional gunfighter, he had to bring his own in.
It's the thing is when if you get a bigger guns, the criminals get big.
It's a thing from Batman.
Batman, yeah.
yeah. Sure. And if I may make another very stretchy Batman reference. Wilson is Riker's number one guy.
All right. If you get that, good on you. It's a very specific joke, but it is funny. So, I agree with you guys, though, in general. I think they were effective antagonists. I think that's a good point, Rich, that you certainly see, sort of old man Rufus Riker's sort of breakdown. Like, he's exasperated, so he's trying to be, a decent guy, but he realized, in order to
you
protect what he thinks is worth protecting.
You could tell he's an honorable man.
Yeah.
Simply because he makes a point to state that he abides by the no guns rule at the bar.
Exactly.
And he made sure that fight had no guns in it, and everybody solved their problems with their fists.
Yeah, there are moments that flesh him out as such. And yes, Wilson as a dragon sort of shows up and he's like a monster and has a duel with his counterpart, as Ian said. So I still think, like I said, they were effective throughout, at least towards the sympathetic group, the rebels, if you will, the homesteaders, those who are ostensibly protagonists. So I think I will give them a solid 1 at the end of the day, if I interpret them as such.
I agree.
1.
Yeah, I'm going to give it a 1 as well at the end of the day.
Okay, it's under protagonist with me, who I've already mentioned. I think it's little Joey. I think he's the first character you actually start following in this.
He is the first character on screen, yes.
Well, besides the deer, but...
Yeah, well...
First human character. First semi-human character.
And
are we calling the deer a character now?
He showed up in
he had
towards
more
the end of the
personality
intro
than
again.
Joey.
Even though Joey's the protagonist, but
Shane!
Yes. All joking aside, I do have something to say when you're done, though, about it.
Here's the issue I have. This child has an unfortunate face.
He ain't the fortunate son, I guess we'll say.
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
But,
I do apologize, but we can't help it because we felt this throughout the movie.
I like what his character represents.
Exactly.
But I hated the actor's portrayal.
I hate this child.
I hated looking at him.
Listening to him.
I wouldn't go that far. It was just that I couldn't take him seriously as a narrator in a sense, or as a character that I'm supposed to be following. Every time he appeared on it, every time he gave one of his goon looks,
I get it, but
it broke me out of this film. And if I had to hear Shane one more time in a broken falsetto, I would. I was gonna lose it.
He's gonna leave the ranch himself.
My rant is done.
Sure. Yes. So real quickly, I'll address the humorous things first, and then the more serious things. About halfway through, maybe a little bit more of this film, I made a drinking game out of drinking every time little Joey said Shane.
We all advised you against it.
Yes. And
It's like
then we
the
all
Big
did it for some
But
reason.
see, here's the thing, but I didn't think about like interpreting him, little Joey, as a protagonist until Ian pointed something out to me. So it's odd because, for example, there are moments when they cuts to little Joey, and I'm like, why are they showing this scene? But if indeed he's supposed to be the protagonist, or you're supposed to be viewing the action, and like Shane is a larger than life hero in the audiences, and like as surrogate for him, his eyes, then it does make sense. It's just that yes, it became grating when they cut back to him between other scenes.
And you see his dead shark eyes.
Yes. His doll's eyes, if you will. So like again,
slack-jawed
yeah,
kid.
we like not that we like, but we ended up mocking the child actor. So sorry about that, kind of. But nevertheless, the interpretation of it, of him being the protagonist and like him like sort of representing something like you said, he's like our infatuation with violence and like the hero figure sort of like neophytes in Narutauji style, like Joseph Campbell style. So like I do like that, and I think if I interpret it that way, I also think it's more solid than I originally thought coming out of the film.
Yeah, so originally I was going to make Shane and even to some extent Joe
yeah.
the protagonist. But I do like the idea of Joey being the protagonist, even if I don't like Joey.
Right.
And this is a weird one because
That's what I was saying, yeah.
of that exact fact. Like, that character is kind of obnoxious just in the way that he's acted. But what he represents in this movie may be stronger than may be able to overcome that.
What's the fact that for every major scene in the movie he was there for?
Exactly.
And when he wasn't there, characters acted as if he was there. Like the whole reason Shane walked away is because he thought it was something that Joey would want. Well, kind of, but also him trying to leave his past behind.
Yeah.
And then he stayed and started the fight specifically because Joey didn't want him to run away.
Yeah, you're right. So like, I think if I view it at that angle, I think it's a more solid one perhaps than I thought, and perhaps it's a more in-depth commentary than originally it was on the surface to me.
I think it's there. Again, though, I don't know. I love the idea. It's a brilliant idea.
I find it so hard to give this guy a
I
about
can't
this?
give this guy a 1. It's impossible because the actor at times did ruin it. But it's the point where, like, I don't care how well it's written, how clever the idea is. If it's not pulled
Just
off
because of it's on
correctly,
screen, yeah.
and I
It's
don't
harsh.
think it was pulled off correctly.
I will give you one more Batman sort of tie-in, if you will. Sometimes you could be just a man, but if you become an idea, you become greater. So, like, if I give him credit on the idea interpretation that he represents versus the actual like portrayal,
The idea of Joey.
yeah, exactly.
And Batman's
For
great.
Joey, I love the
Sometimes
idea
you
of
get
you.
Michael Keaton, sometimes you get Val Kilmer, and this is more of a Val Kilmer Batman. That's all I'm saying.
It's really harsh.
So I'm giving it a 0 because I can't, with good faith, give this child credit.
I want to give it a 1 again on like the meta aspect to it, but
Are you defending a child actor
yeah,
against?
I don't know how
Again?
I don't know how I found myself in this
What's
corner.
happening?
Because I don't agree with you. I don't think the child himself was a good actor. In fact, it was quite off-putting
I think
throughout.
you said that within the first 30 seconds of the
Yeah.
movie.
Yes.
You're like, I hate this kid.
I did. I was like, I hate him
Streak
already.
broken.
But the thing is that you got me, you tripped me up, E, with like what he represents. So should I give credit to that, or should I give credit and or take away credit from the actual portrayal of the kid in the film?
It's up to you.
I'm still debating upon it. So does anyone have any final points to make? I'll try to decide in a second.
God. I'm probably going to give this a 1. It's just, Ian, I like how you might be the only one that's going to give it a 0, and
Even though it was
your
his idea.
argument
Yeah. Even though I'm using
is the
your argument
only
here.
reason that he's getting a 1 for this, if it is indeed the kid. The other thing is that I think I'm counting all 3 of these characters as protagonists in this. I think I'm, to a lesser extent, sure. They're not the people that you follow, but Shane and Joe are both also protagonists in this. I wouldn't say that they're supporting characters.
Can I get meta here for a second?
You can
I
try.
thought that was meta.
If the child is the protagonist and Shane and his father are the protagonists of his version of events,
Mhm.
that means that the antagonist that we chose are not the antagonists of the protagonist, but the antagonists of his fictionalized protagonist.
Yes, I get it.
Right.
So, who antagonizes the child? Nobody. He is simply, but end meta commentary.
He just
it
watches.
doesn't matter.
Right.
He's like the watchers of.
Sure. I know you're going for that. I get it. I'm going to come down with a 1, and here's why. You guys sort of like that was the last kind of straw, if you will. I'm giving it a 1 on the front of the protagonist being our infatuation with violence and hero figures, and not the the acting itself. So,
Sure.
Well, when you put it that way, I have to give it a 1.
like, that's what he represents. So, therefore,
All right.
Or actually,
It's like a 1950s Western version of The Last Action Hero.
yeah, God.
if it's the intention of the director to have this child's goon face representing the audience watching the
Like,
Shane,
It's a great
slack-jawed
Tracy
violence.
that
Ullman
is
name.
the greatest.
Yeah, I mean,
insult
that's
of all time.
That's what I'm saying.
That's
so-
kind of what I thought of when you said that, and that's where
Yeah.
I took it, and that's where my head took it. That's why I have to give it a 1.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'll give it a 1.
Are you giving it a 1?
I like a nice troll.
Yeah, if you take it like that,
All right,
sure.
all right.
Okay, supporting Rich.
Giving it a 0 because
All right, go on.
I don't know, man. I did not like any of the supporting characters. Really, they were just like window dressing for
Yeah,
me.
exactly. That's exactly what I was going to say, Rich. I'm going to give it maybe a soft 0, but I cannot, in all good faith, give it a 1.
I mean, they
They
tried
were
to like
okay.
yeah.
They were there, but they didn't do much for me. And
They
for
tried
the
to
film,
make you care about Fisherman Cap guy and
but
Stonewall Tory.
I cared enough already. Didn't have to like show more scenes of him. So
Oh, what is it you that said it made you care less?
yeah, the more like showed like
Was
the
he? I
random
think
like
that's a-
both of us agreed upon that though.
Yeah.
So
First of all, George R. R. Martin was great in this movie.
no, he wasn't.
But,
You just like it because he looked like him, but his character didn't do
the thing
anything.
is, I count Shane and the father as supporting
Ooh.
He
characters.
should have been. He's in Shane
That's
instead of
true,
writing
yes.
books 6 and 7 right now, or 7 and 8 or
Whatever.
whatever.
He's
the
fleeing
hell.
his
See, that's
homestead instead of
actually
writing.
you just kind of got me there, E. Because if we call little Joey and/or his representation the protagonist, then everyone else, especially Shane, has to fall into, and Big Joe into the secondary role.
Damn it!
I don't see that. I see them as protagonists. So I like that is why I'm going to give supporting a 0, and that's why it was so easy for me to give protagonists a 1. I would say.
Then I might crib off of that. Then I don't want to give secondary 0, and if Shane is like lumped into protagonist underneath everything we just said, which I think he could be and might be, and I could fall down on that. Yeah, that's what I'll do. I'll give secondary 0,
Okay.
assuming that Shane also is like sort of like if he represents little Joey's idealization, then that counts as like his protagonist projection. I guess I want to say.
Right. That's
See-
kind of how I looked at it.
But I could see that aspect, but that's not how I interpret it. I interpret them as supporting. And since we didn't really talk about, I thought that Shane and the father actually did a fairly good job
Yeah, they
acting
were
through this.
fine.
And,
Yeah.
and especially their both friendship and also like kind of the
That's stump chopping.
Yeah.
competitive spirit between the two of like
You ever
which
got a
one of them is
bond?
manlier.
Bond over stump chopping, I guess.
So such awkward stump chopping scene.
But anyway,
Though, you know what started the rivalry?
It
It's
was.
like as soon as the
I mean,
stump chopping
there
got to
were-
it, like
yeah.
it's finish. Shane took off his shirt,
yeah.
It was.
and then
And then-
Joe's wife just
Then it's on.
had enough.
Yeah.
Her eyeballs popped out of her head.
Yeah, and
It was
speaking of his
competitive.
wife, like I thought she was sort of bland at best, so she's definitely
Yeah.
secondary. So
Yeah, I agree. I will.
She was less bland than I was expecting her to be.
she was about as
I was
bland as
not. I was not
she
expecting.
was about
much.
as bland as I expected, and didn't disappoint. So
I will say that Joe and Shane both did a very good job in this movie. But I do
they were
count them
acting
as
well.
protagonists. So like because of that, I'm going to give supporting a 0. All the other supporting characters were there.
they were in the film.
That's the best I can say
Yeah.
about. That's the best thing I can say about them.
Well, I have to give it a 1
I would
because
say.
I count
Sure.
Shane and
Sure.
It depends where you lump them. So I'm on Steve-O's side in this case. So I'm gonna give him 0
I'm
secondary.
sticking with my 0.
Right.
That makes sense.
Okay, well, on to dialogue with Scott.
Another kind of iffy one for me because there are about maybe 3.5, possibly 4 total speeches that were made. 2 from Shane, the one at the end for sure. Actually, the confrontation in the bar when he confronts Wilson, I thought was quite well written, had some good lines of dialogue. but the rest of it were just sort of like white Western noise, I suppose. Like it was the things they're gonna say, like
Well described.
let's go to the towns, go to the bar, gotta fix this, gotta fix that. Shane,
Gotta get the
Shane,
whiskey.
1,000 times. Like that was super grating. So
Yep.
like
Yes,
that-
it was.
that's probably gonna be like, if all things being equal, that is going to be the thing that pushes me like over to a 0. So I might like, if you guys got anything else, is anyone gonna argue for a 1? And if so, speak now.
I may argue for a 1 just because of those scenes that did have really good dialogue, speeches, those types of things.
I would also add on
The-
to that. Oh, sorry.
Well,
Finish up.
I was gonna just agree that the Shane coming out of Joey's mouth every 10 seconds was annoying as hell.
That's why I had to make it a drinking game. Is all good, Rich.
But yeah, I would also add on to that. There were a couple lines that we heard that we had to ask ourselves, is the first time this has ever been put on the film. Like when it's like, are you talking to me? I don't see anybody else standing over
Yeah.
there.
That's true, but like all I'm saying, so that was like maybe the shining moments, like the quality moments, I would say like 30% or less, and the rest of the dialogue was just again bog standard at best and like annoying at worst. So
There's an interesting thing when watching older movies, when things you think are cliched, and it turns out that movie
Sure,
Yeah.
like,
was
did
one of
it-
the original ones to develop it. So I kept, as you said, Rich, like a couple of things like, oh, did everyone steal from Shane for this piece of dialogue? But I'm going to give this a very strong Shane, which equates to a 0 because that kid was.
Yeah.
I didn't take the points away for protagonist. I'm taking the points away right here.
yeah, I'm pretty much in that boat. So mark it 0, dude.
Man, like there are several good points of dialogue in this, and
Yes,
I would also say,
I'm sorry, Steve. Before you go on, yes, but not outweighed by the other bland and/or just yelling Shane in your face. So
okay. Well, I would also say though that there wasn't any point of cringing that I did in this.
well, there was for me. So
The him yelling Shane over and over again was annoying, but it wasn't like cringeworthy. It wasn't like, oh,
I get it, but-
like why or anything like that. It was just so that's where I'm having trouble. Like I didn't cringe, and there are several points where, yeah, this might be something that was cliched came from this. Like I you have to give it credit for that. But I think I am going to give it a very soft 0 at the end of the day, just for the kids' dialogue that just was annoying way too often.
I think I may give it a 1, and here's why.
all right.
The introspective dialogue that everybody had when they were explaining their motives, and especially the changes in character they were going through, I really like that. Like the whole
Yeah,
bit with
that stuff was well done. I
like
agree.
the whole
Rich.
bit with Marion and Shane when they were trying to figure, like when she was trying to get Joe not to go off and do whatever he was going to do, and her like kind of having the back and forth with Shane over what what he feels like he has to do as a man. She's like, oh, he's going to get himself killed, and I don't know, just give a good look into where their heads were at.
Like I get
Yeah.
that. Like I said, like that stuff, yes, was good, but it doesn't quite outweigh it. Like
doesn't outweigh the Shane.
yeah, if I cut it up, it doesn't outweigh the Shane. It doesn't outweigh like the bland.
Oh, the Shane.
Like I don't. Again,
The
like
Shane of
I don't
it
know
all.
what could, but even beyond that, like the other pieces of dialogue, anything that was happening that wasn't that, I was sort of like not blanking out, but like just like okay, let's go. Can we please go to the next scene? Like yes, the character development via their
Well,
dialogue. but-
I'm actually only looking at this movie, well, in terms of dialogue, at intro and conclusion. Because
well,
the body was so drawn out and boring. That
yeah, that's what I'm saying. So that's why I'm giving it a 0, solid 0 probably.
Stick by your guns, Rich. All right, we're on to style with Mr. Omosi.
All right. I actually really enjoyed the style of this movie. I thought there were really great points of cinematography, like great shots. You know, what Westerns are known for, these like long shots of the desert and these great landscapes and things like that. Also, I thought there was kind of interesting, as I mentioned before, they did a lot of it, but like these through the window shots and the fight scene between Shane
The fight scene at least was good. Yeah.
and Joe was really interestingly shot, and the bar fight scene was really well shot as well. Outside of that, it had a pretty standard Western soundtrack, but I would say that this movie probably set the bar for that type of thing at this point. You know, I don't know how many big Westerns came out before. What was this, 53 or whatever?
Yeah.
Mhm.
But
May I interrupt for a second?
Sure.
I like how we were giving this film the benefit of the doubt that it was innovative in all these fronts. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying that, like, we've done this a couple of times. So I think, like,
I don't know
it
how
seems
true or
like
not that is,
this
or to what extent,
film-
but
and that is a testament to the film that it feels like it is consequential.
It is, and
Sure.
like,
That's a good point,
You've
Eve.
seen other films. Well, what I can say is I've seen other films since then do things that this film has done. I certainly can't say that I've seen films before this film that did the same things that this did. Granted, that's because I haven't seen a ton of films from the 40s and earlier. I've seen a handful probably, but still, like, this seems like it's kind of the beginning of a lot of the kind of tropes that came out of westerns, and it does a lot of them really well. Like I said, the cinematography, the soundtrack were both done really well. I'll hand it over to you guys if you have anything else to speak about.
also
Stuff.
this, you just made me think of it actually. It's almost like this is the era around, in and around John Wayne films are being made. This could almost be a John Wayne film featuring not John Wayne, I would say. Like something, like, if you get what I mean.
John Wayne doesn't die at the end.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Like, but just in terms of, like, again, like you said, Steve-O, yes, you sort of expect like sweeping shots of the desert and the plains and so forth, and there was all that. And I do think like especially the fight scenes, the fight between Shane and Big Joe, you almost like see it through like between the horses' hooves as if like they're getting spooked. I thought that was pretty well done. And just in general, I think what's fine. Like, again, there was no parts of the cinematography when I thought like that was odd or like that was a weird shot or anything. It looked odd. So I think in general, it was solid. And there were certain points beyond that I think came together, and it was a good looking film. So I'll probably give it a solid 1 for style.
So I mentioned this earlier about, in a sense, the use of violence in this film. And to say it was handled in kind of a 1950s absurdist quality to it, where it's over the top but not glamorized.
Sure.
It's not here to suggest that you're seeing the main character lose fights. And like he eventually wins, but you're seeing the repercussions of it. Again, he dies at the end. Like when the first guy who gets shot ends up just his body flying back into the mud, which he so carefully stepped over before like he died, and like it just his body left caked in mud and blood.
They're like, drag him away, get him out of here. Yeah.
It's not making it fun, and I think this movie is purposely trying to take the fun out of westerns, but while not like that's the wrong way.
I
to
see
say
what
it,
you mean,
but,
though.
like,
I know what you
try
mean by
to
that.
de-glamorize westerns, and I think again, very much like later films would do. I think it does a fair job at that, and you can see how it paved the way.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna have to give it a strong 1 for that.
Yeah, definitely giving a 1.
1 for everyone else?
Yep, 1 for me.
One's all
All
right.
right. And on to recommendations with me. I would recommend watching a re-edit of this.
Is there one? If there is one.
There should be, because
see what you mean, yes.
there's some
There should be.
scenes in this movie that, in fact, in general, this movie should be seen more than it shouldn't be seen. But I think there's parts that could be cut out to make a better movie. Perhaps that's why the one on YouTube was 30 minutes shorter or so. But I mean, like, it's a very good like film and has some very important parts. If you're a fan of film, then you should see this, especially if you're a fan of westerns. You'll see a lot of what came later through this.
Yeah, I still think it's solid. I think it, like you said, I like what you said, phrase it as such that it deserves to be seen more than it doesn't, even though it certainly has a couple of flaws, if you will, especially in terms of editing. Sure, I would say it could be like 20 minutes shorter, and it wouldn't lose much, and it would still be, again, would make it a tighter film. But I still think it stands. It's a better Western than I was expecting. I thought it was very well done on a lot of fronts. I took points away from the points I said, but overall, I think, yeah, it's worth to see. I would recommend it.
Yeah, I mean, there's not much that I can say. I think that if you are interested in how anything that's kind of Western now, I actually, since we've just done Logan, I see a lot of where the genre has come in this movie. In this movie, Logan's kind of a Western at its heart, and it pulls a lot from this movie, and that's bookended in the movie itself by quoting it directly.
In fact, somebody should have been sued.
No, I think if you show your influence on your sleeve, you're okay. But But either way,
if you actually put a scene from the movie into your movie. But you know, and not just Logan, like, you know, even more straight up westerns,
sure,
more modern westerns from the 90s, 2000s, and today, you'll you'll see a lot of the influence of this film, and there's definitely something to be said for going back and watching it. So I'm going to give it a 1.
I'm going to give it a 1 as well. Like, it went in a slightly different direction than I was expecting it to go. Like you said, Ian, how showing the downsides of being the quote unquote heroic gunslinger in the West, and not having the hero make it out alive at the end. It's ballsy for its time, and
you can still see that to this day. Its shadow extends, I suppose I would say, as well.
Because even now, and with movies now, it's not often you see the hero not make it or do a dressing down of those those action tropes that we like so much.
Exactly.
Okay, well, I'll give out the scores now. Surprise, I have the high score here.
What?
Rich and I do, with but we both gave it 8s, and curmudgeonly Shane's here, Scott and Steven both gave it 7s.
Shane Hermosi and Shane Thurlow.
Which comes out to a 7.5 overall, which I actually think is perhaps a less score than it might deserve, but
it's close.
I think it's, in a sense, if anything we gave points off of, it's because it diminished with time.
Yeah.
And I think if we had seen this back when it was released, it would have been like
a miracle because I wasn't alive.
Like, sure. But
just kidding. It probably would have blown us away if we saw this, in theaters.
If we'd end up giving 8, I would say that's about right. 7.5 maybe is a little lowball, but I still think it's around the right area. So, sure.
So yeah, I'm Jonathan Ian Manzer, and I have to go chop a stump here with Rich Berry,
Shane,
Stephen Hermosi,
also Shane,
and Scott Thurlow.
We'll Shane you next time. Good night.
We hope you've enjoyed your stay.
MOTSterpiece Theatre.
Join us again next time, won't you?
MOTSterpiece Theatre.
Editing and engineering by Scott Thurlow. Music by Christopher Morgan. Check us out on YouTube and iTunes for the shows, and on Facebook and Twitter for updates.
MOTSterpiece Theatre.